The wind had teeth out here. It gnawed at the frayed edges of Jack Davis's old blue coat, worrying the threads just as the country worried its own conscience. Which is to say, not very much at all. The coat was too thin for the high lonesome of the territory, and too thick for the memory of the sweltering Georgia summers he had worn it through. It was a contradiction, much like the man inside it. Jack had worn the uniform of a nation, fought in its brutal, bloody arguments, and carried its flag over fields where men screamed for their mothers. Now, that same nation had spit him out onto this raw, unfinished edge of the world with nothing but a nagging ache in his left leg and a single silver dollar in his pocket. The dollar was smooth, worn almost featureless from the nervous rubbing of his thumb. It was his last connection to a life that had evaporated like a puddle in the prairie sun. He had come west from Pennsylvania, a place that felt impossibly green and tame in his memory, a place of stone fences and predictable seasons. He had come west seeking something he could not name, perhaps a quiet place to let the noise in his head finally settle. Instead, he found a land that was louder, sharper, and infinitely more demanding than any battlefield. This was the late 19th century, a time when the country was stretching its limbs, yawning and shoving aside whatever and whoever was already there. The mountains, jagged purple against a sky too big to comprehend, looked like the broken teeth of some ancient god. The forests were dark, primitive, holding secrets and dangers that the men coming from the east had no words for. The prairies were oceans of grass, beautiful and terrible, capable of swallowing a man whole, leaving not even a ripple to mark his passing. Life and death did not walk hand in hand here. They danced a frantic, clumsy reel, and it was impossible to tell who was leading. Jack Davis was lost. He had been a good soldier, which was a terrible thing to be. He had followed orders until the orders themselves had seemed insane, a fever dream of smoke and canister shot. When the fighting stopped, the silence was worse. He took his discharge, his wound, and his back pay, and he drifted. The money bled away, as money does a bad hand of cards in a smoky tent. A bottle to blur the faces in his memory, a new set of boots when the old ones gave up their souls. Now, the wound throbbed with the cold, and the last dollar felt heavy, like an anchor. He limped into a town that was little more than a scar on the landscape. It had a name, Purgatory Flat, which someone had probably thought was witty. It was just 2 rows of raw lumber buildings staring at each other across a river of mud and manure called a street. There was a saloon, its bat-wing doors flapping like lazy wings, a general store with a sun-faded sign, a livery, and a blacksmith's forge that rang with the only honest sound in town. The air smelled of green wood, stale whiskey, alkali dust, and the sour tang of desperation. This was where men came when they had nowhere else to go, a holding pen for the hopeful and the damned. Jack was just looking for work, anything. Sweeping out the saloon, mucking stalls, digging a ditch, anything to earn a meal and a roof that did not leak. He felt the eyes of the town on him as he moved down the boardwalk, his limp more pronounced on the uneven planks. He was a stranger, still wearing the ghost of a uniform in a place where allegiances were shifting and suspect. He was prey, and he knew it. He was heading for the livery, thinking maybe the hostler needed a hand. When he saw the gathering, it was not a formal affair, just a knot of rough men clustered in the muddy alley between the saloon and the general store. Their voices were low, carrying a kind of greasy excitement that made the hair on Jack's neck stand up. He had heard that tone before, in camps before a raid, in towns before a lynching. It was the sound of men enjoying their own casual cruelty. He was tired. He was hungry. His leg ached clear up to his hip. He should have kept walking. He knew it, whatever this was. It was not his trouble. He had enough trouble to fill a wagon, but some leftover piece of the man he used to be, the man who believed in things like duty and right, made him stop. He eased closer, staying in the shadow of the saloon's overhang, and looked. At the center of the circle stood a man in a dusty bowler hat, a livestock trader by the look of him, all puff and bluster. And beside him, her hands bound in front of her with a length of rough rope, stood a girl. She was young, maybe 18 or 19 summers, though it was hard to tell. She was Apache. Her black hair was matted with dust and twigs, her cotton dress torn at the shoulder, her feet bare and bleeding on the rocky mud. She was thin, but she stood as straight as a lodgepole pine, her chin high. She was not looking at the men around her, not at the trader praising her strengths as if she were a broodmare. She was staring past them, her black eyes fixed on the distant line of the mountains. A look of such profound, contained fury in them that it made Jack's breath catch. She was a captive, a piece of property, but she was not conquered. "Strong back," the trader was saying, slapping her on the shoulder. She did not flinch, but a muscle in her jaw tightened. "Good for field work or indoors. Taught some manners, mostly. Knows her place. Who'll start the bidding, let us say $20. A man with a tobacco-stained beard laughed. $20 for that. She's half-starved. I'll give you 10. Silas. $10. Silas feigned outrage. "This is a prime specimen. Look at the fight in her. That is spirit. You cannot buy spirit like that. 15. Someone give me 15. Jack watched, his stomach turning over. He had seen the aftermath of the Army's campaigns. He had seen the burned villages, the weeping women rounded up and shipped off to reservations that were nothing but prisons. He had tried to tell himself it was war, that it was necessary for progress, for the expansion of the nation he served. But standing here, in this muddy alley, seeing this one girl for sale, all the justifications felt like ash in his mouth. This was not war. This was just greed. This was the same ugly business that had been happening for centuries, just with a different backdrop. The men haggled. The price crept up to $12, then $14. They were not bidding high. She was Apache, and the Apache were proving to be a stubborn, bloody problem for the Army and the settlers. She was dangerous property. The girl, Taji, though Jack did not know her name then, never moved. She just kept staring at those mountains, as if she could will herself back to them. He saw a tremor run through her, a fight to keep from shaking, whether from cold or rage. He could not tell. And in that moment, he saw himself. He saw the same cage, the same desperate yearning for a freedom that seemed impossibly distant. He was trapped by his past, by his poverty, by his broken body. She was trapped by a rope and a circle of leering men. They were the same. $14. Going once, Silas the trader called out. Impatient. He wanted to get back to the bar. A bargain. Gentlemen. 14. Jack's hand went to his pocket. His fingers closed around the single, smooth coin. His last dollar. It was a joke. It was less than a tenth of what they were asking. It was nothing. It was his whole world. It was a meal. It was a bed for the night. It was the slim, desperate chance of starting over. $14. Going twice. He could not do it. It was insane. He would be condemning himself. He would be penniless, starving, in a town that would just as soon strip his boots as help him. He would be buying a responsibility he could not possibly manage. A girl who probably hated him on sight simply for the color of his skin. Sold to Mr. 20. The word came out of Jack's mouth before he could stop it. It was rough, dry, barely a croak. The alley went silent. Every man turned to look at him. He saw surprise, amusement, and in some, a flicker of annoyance. He had spoiled their sport. Silas the trader squinted at him, taking in the worn coat, the limp. $20. You say that is a bold bid, friend? Let us see the color of your money. Jack's heart hammered against his ribs. This was the stupidest thing he had ever done. He pulled his hand from his pocket and stepped forward into the muddy circle. He walked past the girl, careful not to look at her, and went right up to the trader. He opened his palm. On it lay the single silver dollar. A man barked a laugh. He said 20. Silas, not one." "That is right," Jack said, his voice level, though his insides were shaking. "I am bidding $20. This is my down payment." Silas stared at the coin, then at Jack's face. He saw something in Jack's eyes, a flat, cold stillness that had been hammered into him at places like Antietam and Gettysburg. It was not the look of a man making a joke. It was the look of a man who had nothing left to lose and was therefore dangerous. "Friend," Silas said, lowering his voice, "I am not running a line of credit." "I know," Jack said, "but you are going to take my dollar. And you are going to take this." He reached inside his coat. The men tensed. Jack moved slowly. He pulled out the one other thing he owned. It was his service revolver, a heavy Colt, well-oiled and loaded. He had kept it, against regulations, because out here, a man without a weapon was just meat. He laid the revolver in Silas's hand. "This is worth more than the difference. You know it is." Silas weighed the gun. His eyes were greedy now. A good Colt was worth $30. Easy. He looked at Jack, then at the girl, then back at Jack. He smiled, a greasy spreading of his lips. "Well, now, you should have started with that. Soldier, a gun is solid currency." He nodded. "She is yours." He pocketed the silver dollar, tucked the revolver into his own belt, and then, as an afterthought, he took a knife from his boot and sawed through the rope on the girl's wrists. He rubbed his hands together as if finishing a dirty job. "Pleasure doing business with you." The circle of men broke apart, grumbling, their entertainment over. They drifted back toward the saloon, casting curious, mocking glances at Jack. And then he was alone. Alone in a muddy alley in a town called Purgatory Flat, with an aching leg and a pocket that was completely, terrifyingly empty. He was alone. Except for the Apache girl. She rubbed her raw wrists, her face completely impassive. She had not looked at him. Not once. Not when he made the bid. Not when he handed over his gun. Not when the rope fell away. Jack stood there, the full, crushing weight of his actions settling on him. He had spent his last dollar, and his only defense, on a memory, on a flicker of defiance in a stranger's eyes. He had bought her freedom. He cleared his throat. The sound was loud in the sudden quiet. "Well," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt, I guess you are free to go." Only then did she turn. She lifted her head and looked at him. Her eyes were as black and deep as a canyon at midnight. There was no gratitude in them. There was no relief. There was no fear. There was only a cold, sharp, challenging mistrust. It was a look that stripped him bare, that saw right through his grand gesture and called it the fool's errand it was. Jack Davis had never felt more alone, or more terrified, in his entire life. The alley was a vacuum. The sounds of the saloon, the clink of glasses, the rough laughter, seemed impossibly distant, muffled by the sheer, suffocating weight of the girl's stare. Jack felt pinned by it, like a moth to a board. He had faced down charging lines of gray, heard the rebel yell rise to a scream, and never felt the kind of raw, naked exposure he felt in this one moment. Her gaze was not just mistrust. It was an inventory. It was a judgment. It was the cold, ancient anger of a people who had been lied to and broken and driven from their own lands by men who looked exactly like him. "You are free," he said again, and the word sounded stupid and hollow in his own ears. Free! What did that word even mean? Coming from him, he was a white man, a soldier, the very symbol of her captivity. He had just participated in the grotesque theater of her sale. To her, he was not a rescuer. He was just the final bidder, a new owner with a different, perhaps more confusing, set of rules. She said nothing. Her chest rose and fell in a slow, controlled rhythm, the only sign of the life pounding inside her. Her hands, red and raw from the ropes, clenched and unclenched at her sides. She did not move to flee. She did not weep with relief. She simply stood, a pillar of defiance in the stinking mud, and waited. She was waiting to see what kind of cage this was. Jack's grand gesture evaporated, leaving him with the cold, hard reality. He was a fool, a penniless, weaponless fool. He had given away his last dollar and his only means of defense. He was as vulnerable as she was, maybe more so. He knew how to survive in a war, but this was different. This was a wilderness of 1,000 subtle, interlocking cruelties, and he had just broken the biggest rule he had made himself conspicuous. "You should go," he urged, his voice dropping, becoming more desperate. He gestured, a clumsy flap of his hand, toward the end of the alley, toward the open land that stretched into the haze. "Your people. The mountains." He pointed at the jagged peaks she had been staring at, the ones that now looked like a sanctuary. She followed his gesture, her eyes shifting to the mountains, and for a fleeting second, something flickered across her face, a deep, aching sorrow, so profound it was almost visible, like heat shimmer. Then it was gone, locked away behind the mask. She looked back at him. Her eyes said the one thing he could not answer, and you. He had no answer. He could not stay here. Silas the traitor now had his gun. The other men in town had seen him, a broke stranger, make a fool of himself. He was a target, but he could not leave her either. Not until he was sure. He took a half-step toward her, holding his hands up, palms out. I will not hurt you. I could not let them. He trailed off. How could he explain the tangled knot of shame and pity, and the sudden, sharp memory of his own lost honor that had made him open his mouth? Before he could find any more useless words, the world changed. The lazy flap of the saloon doors swung open with a sharp thud. The sudden noise cut through the alley's fragile quiet. It was not the drunken laughter of the men from before. This was a different energy, measured, cold. A man stepped out into the sunlight, followed by 2 others. He was not like the dusty prospectors or trail hands. He wore a clean duster, a flat-brimmed hat, and a pair of revolvers strapped low on his hips. His face was sharp, clean-shaven, with the eyes the color of a winter sky. He looked like a man who never made a mistake and never forgave one. He looked at the girl, and a slow smile of pure satisfaction spread across his face. "Well, now," the man said, his voice as smooth as a river stone, "look what the cat dragged in. I heard Silas was bragging about a new piece of stock, but I did not believe him." He ignored Jack completely. His gaze was fixed on Taji, a look of appraisal that was far more terrifying than the leering of the previous crowd. It was the look of an expert. "That is Nday's daughter," the man said, almost to himself. "Been tracking her since the skirmish at Willow Creek. She is worth $1,000 in the right market, maybe more." He finally turned those cold eyes on Jack. He looked at Jack's worn coat, his limp, his empty hands. Contempt dripped from him. "You must be the soldier," he said. "Silas is already telling the whole saloon about the fool who traded a working colt for this runaway. You made a very bad trade, friend." Jack's blood felt thick and slow in his veins. The alley, which had felt empty, now felt like a trap, the walls closing in. "I bought her," Jack managed to say, his voice thick. "From Silas. She is free." The man, Martin Reed, let out a short, sharp laugh that had no humor in "Free, son. Nothing is free out here. You did not buy her. You bought stolen goods. Silas is a bottom feeder, a fool who picks up scraps. I am the man who does the hunting, and that one, she belongs to me." "She belongs to herself," Jack said, though the words felt small against the man's certainty. He moved, shifting his body just slightly, putting himself more squarely between Reed and Taji. It was a soldier's instinct, a reflex. Reed's smile vanished. "I have been on her trail for a month, lost 2 men in the process. She is not some stray calf, soldier. She is a warrior, and she is my property. Now, I will give you one chance. You step aside. You walk away. Forget this happened. Maybe you even live to see tomorrow." Jack looked at the man. He saw the easy confidence, The absolute lack of any moral compass. He saw the guns, and he looked past him. At Taji. She was watching Reed, her body coiled like a snake, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. She was not looking at Jack as a protector. She was looking at him as an obstacle. But that leftover piece of him, that stubborn, foolish core that had survived the war, it would not let him move. "No," Jack said. Reed's face darkened. "Wrong answer." He did not even raise his voice. He just nodded, a simple, curt gesture to the two men with him. "Take her. Put a bullet in his leg. Teach him some manners." The men moved, spreading out. They were trail-hardened, rough, their hands dropping to their belts. Jack had no gun, no knife, no plan. He had only his body and a few seconds. He did the only thing he could. He spun, grabbed Tazi's arm, and shoved her as hard as he could toward the back of the alley, toward the refuse heap and the narrow gap between the buildings. "Run!" he roared. Then he turned and launched himself at the first man. His bad leg be damned. He slammed his shoulder into the man's chest, driving him back into his partner. The alley exploded. A fist connected with Jack's jaw, sending stars bursting behind his eyes. He went down to one knee, the mud sucking at him. One of the men kicked him in the ribs, a brutal, booted stomp that stole his breath. He gasped, rolling, trying to get his legs under him. He was a soldier, but he was one man, and he was hurt. This was a fool's death. He could hear Reed laughing, a low, cruel sound. "Get the girl, you idiots!" Reed shouted. Jack scrambled up, bracing himself for the final blow, but it did not come. He looked over. The man who had kicked him was on his way to Tazi. She had not run, not yet. She had backed against the raw lumber of the general store, her eyes scanning the ground. She had snatched up a thick, broken bottle, the glass jagged and green. As the man lunged for her, she moved. It was not a cowering defense. It was an attack. She drove the bottle forward and up, not at his arm, but at his face. He screamed, a high, thin sound, and staggered back, clutching his cheek, blood welling between his fingers. The second man, stunned, turned toward her. That gave Jack his opening. He surged up from the ground, his bad legs screaming, and drove his head into the man's stomach. The man grunted, folding. Jack hit him again, a desperate, clumsy punch to the kidney. Enough of this, Reed's voice was a whip crack. The sound of a gunshot ripped the air apart. It was deafening in the narrow space. Bark splintered from the wall just inches from Jack's head. He froze. The other two men backed away, one still bleeding, the other holding his gut. Reed stood there, his revolver smoking in his hand. His face was a mask of cold fury. The game was over. "You are dead, soldier," he snarled. "You and the witch. You will be crawling for water before the sun sets." But the gunshot had been a mistake. It had broken the spell of the town. Men were shouting, doors were slamming. The heads of curious onlookers were popping out of the saloon. Reed had just drawn the one thing he did not want witnesses. He was a hunter, not a brawler. He preferred his work quiet. He saw the men coming, and he cursed, low and vicious. He holstered his pistol. "This is not over," he hissed at Jack. He turned to his men. "Get the horses. Now they are on foot. They will not get past the river flats." He backed away, his eyes never leaving them, a promise of death in his gaze. This was it, their only chance. The seconds of confusion were all they would get. Jack grabbed Tazi's arm. "Now!" he panted, his ribs aching, his mouth full of the taste of mud and blood. "We have to run. Now!" She recoiled from his touch, yanking her arm free with a snarl, but she saw the same truth he did. She saw Reed's men scrambling for their mounts. She saw the open prairie and the distant, fading hope of the mountains. She ran, and Jack ran with her. They burst from the mouth of the alley, not onto the main street, but behind the row of buildings. They scrambled over a woodpile, sending logs clattering. A horse tied to a rail shied, rearing in panic. They did not look back. They ran past the blacksmiths, the clang of the hammer stopping in mid-swing. They ran past the assayer's office, a startled man in a green visor staring at them through the glass. They were at the edge of town, the last raw lumber shack giving way to alkali dust and scrub brush. Behind them, they heard the pound of hooves, and Reed's voice, raised in a commanding shout. "There, cut them off. Do not let them reach the rocks." The chase was on. Jack's leg was a rod of pure fire. Every step was a fresh, hot agony. His lungs burned. He was a soldier, built for marching, but he was wounded, and the men behind them were mounted. He was running a race he could not possibly win. He glanced at the girl beside him. Tazi, she was flowing over the rough ground. Her bare feet, already cut and bruised, seemed to find purchase where he slipped. She ran with her head up, her eyes fixed on the horizon, not with the panic of prey, but with the grim determination of a warrior. She was exhausted, starved, and terrified. But she was alive, and she intended to stay that way. The gap between the town and the first line of rocky foothills looked like 1,000,000 miles, an ocean of open ground with no cover. Jack tasted the dust in his throat. He had spent his last dollar and his only gun to buy this girl's freedom. Now he understood. He had not bought her anything. He had only bought them a shared sentence, a desperate, running fight against a man who would not stop until they were both captured or dead. The full, crushing weight of his impulsive act settled on him. He had been looking for a place to rest, and instead, he had just volunteered for another war. The high-pitched thwack of a rifle ball striking rock just yards to their left was the only punctuation their flight needed. There was no time for thought, only for the burning, ragged gasping for air. The town of Purgatory Flat was already a bad memory behind them, and the men on horseback were closing the open ground. Jack Davis's bad leg felt like it was splitting apart, the muscle tearing from the bone with every agonizing, lurching step. He was a broken plow horse trying to race thoroughbreds, and he was losing. Beside him, Taji was a different creature. She ran not with panic, but with a desperate, fluid economy of motion. Her bare feet found purchase on the alkali dust and loose stones. Her body bent low, her eyes fixed on the first crumpled line of foothills. She was faster than he was. He knew, with a sudden, cold certainty, that he was slowing her down. He was going to be the death of them both. "The rocks," he gasped, forcing the words out. "Get to the rocks." The hunters were shouting, their voices carried on the wind, a sound of sport and cruel amusement. They were not trying to kill them. Not yet. $1,000 prize was not something you shot carelessly. They were herding them, pushing them, enjoying the run. Taji veered left, aiming for a shallow wash, a dry riverbed that offered a small dip in the terrain. Jack followed, sliding down the gravelly bank, his bad leg collapsing under him. He fell hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs. For a second, he just lay there, the taste of dirt and failure in his mouth. This is it. This is where it ends. She was back. Her small hand grabbed the collar of his worn blue coat and hauled at him with a strength that shocked him. Her face was inches from his, a mask of pure, undiluted fury. She did not scream. She hissed, a single, sharp sound, like a snake's warning. It was not an act of rescue. It was an act of profound impatience. He scrambled up, shame giving him a last, sour burst of adrenaline. They ran, crouched low in the wash. The sound of the hooves grew louder, then veered away as the riders overshot them, expecting them to have made for the higher rocks. It bought them minutes, nothing more. They climbed out of the wash and into the labyrinth of sandstone. Here, the ground changed. It was all jagged edges, narrow gaps, and sudden drop-offs. A horse was a liability here. The hoofbeats slowed. The shouting became more organized. Reed was splitting his men, sending them to circle the small outcrop. Taji moved through the rocks like water, seeming to sense the paths, the gaps, the hidden passages. Jack followed, his big, clumsy body crashing through brush, his boots slipping on the stone. He was a cannonball trying to follow a whisper. She found a cleft, a narrow space between two towering slabs of red rock, barely wide enough for a man's shoulders. She slid into it without hesitation. Jack pushed in after her. They were hidden. The space was deep, ending in a dark pocket of shadow. They could hear the men, their voices echoing strangely off the stone. "They are in here somewhere." That was Reed's voice, sharp and certain. "Find them. I want her alive. The man, he is expendable." Jack leaned against the cold stone, his chest heaving. His leg was shaking so badly he could barely stand. The adrenaline was gone, leaving behind a cold, hollow terror. They were trapped. They were on foot, with no food, no water, no weapon, and the only person with him looked at him as if he were something she had found stuck to her foot. He slid down the rock wall until he was sitting on the dusty floor of the crevice. He looked at Taji. She was standing at the entrance, just inside the shadow, listening, her head tilted. She was perfectly still. We lost them," Jack whispered, the words sounding absurdly optimistic. "For a minute." She turned her head, looking at him down the length of the narrow passage. Her eyes were black pits in the gloom. The silence stretched, filled only by Jack's ragged breathing and the distant, frustrated shouts of their pursuers. Then she spoke. Her voice was low and rough, as if from disuse, but her English was clear, chillingly clear. "Why?" Jack blinked. The sound of her voice, the simple, direct question, wrong-footed him. Why, what we had to run. They would have... "Why?" she repeated, and this time she moved, stepping back from the light, coming closer to him in the shadows. "Why you?" She made a small, sharp gesture with her chin, a gesture that encompassed the alley, the money, the gun, the whole stupid, disastrous affair. Jack swallowed. He tried to gather the words. He wanted to explain, to make her see. I could not let them. What they were doing. It was not right. No person should be sold. He did not know what he expected. Relief, understanding, perhaps a flicker of the gratitude he had so foolishly anticipated back in the alley. He received nothing of the sort. A sound came from her throat, a small, dry, bitter sound of contempt. It was almost a laugh, but it held no humor. It was the sound of a bone breaking. "Not right," she repeated, tasting the words as if they were poison. "You, a white man, a soldier." She did not ask if he was a soldier. She stated it as a fact. The coat, the set of his shoulders, the way he had moved in the alley. It was a brand on him. "You come, you buy me, you feel strong." "No," Jack protested, shaking his head. "That is not. I just wanted you to be free, to get away, to go home, back to the mountains." He pointed vaguely, though the rocks blocked any view. Her contempt sharpened. "Becoming a blade? Home," she said, and the word was full of broken glass. "You think home?" She took another step toward him. "My home is a pile of black sticks. The ponies are gone. The children, gone, taken." She looked at his coat. "By your people, blue coats, soldiers." Jack flinched as if she had struck him. He had no reply. He had been one of those soldiers. He had followed those orders. He had stood guard over the huddled, weeping survivors of a dozen such raids, telling himself it was just a necessary part of bringing order to the frontier. "You see me," she went on, her voice a low, burning ember. "You feel bad." She touched her own chest, then pointed at him. "A sickness in here. For what you did, for what your people do." "I was just trying to help," he said, but the words were weak, a child's defense. "Help," she spat the word. "You do not help. You pay. You give your gun. You feel good. You feel clean." She stepped back, her point made, her disgust a physical presence in the narrow space. "I am not your atonement, soldier. I am not the water you wash your hands with." She turned away from him, returning to her post at the mouth of the crevice, a small, straight-backed silhouette against the slice of bright, hostile sky. She resumed her watch, as if he were no longer there, as if he were just a piece of the rock, a talking stone that had bothered her for a moment. Jack sat in the darkness, the truth of her words hitting him harder than any fist in the alley. She was right. He had not seen a person in that alley. He had seen a symbol. He had seen a chance to undo, in one small, stupid gesture, 1,000 moments of cowardice and complicity. He had not done it for her. He had done it for himself. And in doing so, he had dragged her from one cage right into another, a cage of his own making, a desperate flight with a crippled, guilty fool who was now her sole responsibility. The shouts outside grew more distant. Reed was widening the search. They were safe, for now, but they were trapped by the hunters, and trapped by the crushing, suffocating weight of his good intentions. The afternoon bled away. The sliver of sky visible from their hiding place turned from a bright, hard blue to a pale, washed-out gray. The air grew colder. A wind began to whisper through the canyons, carrying a new, sharp smell, the smell of high-altitude cold. "We have to move," Jack said, his voice raw. He had to try. "When it gets dark, we have to climb, get higher. They cannot follow with the horses." Taji gave no sign she had heard him, but he knew she was listening. "We need water, food," he continued, stating the obvious. The soldier in him trying to make a plan, to impose order on a situation that was completely chaotic. She finally looked back at him, her face unreadable. "You are loud," she said. "You walk like a buffalo. You smell of the town." She turned back to the sky. Rain is coming, then snow. He had felt the change in pressure, but she knew. She could read this land like a book he had never even opened. They waited until the sun had sunk completely, leaving the world in a deep, purple twilight. The shouts had faded. Reed had likely pulled his men back to make a cold camp and wait for morning. They knew their prey was on foot, wounded, and without supplies. The land and the night would do their work for them. Taji slid from the crevice. Jack pushed himself to his feet. His leg was stiff and fiery. Every muscle in his body ached. He was hungry, a deep, gnawing emptiness. He was thirsty, he felt useless. She led. She did not ask. She did not wait. She simply moved into the growing darkness, and he followed. She climbed. She moved up the spine of the foothills, heading relentlessly toward the jagged, dark line of the high peaks. The terrain was brutal, a sheer, scrambling climb over loose rock and through thorny, clutching brush. Jack was a liability. He slipped, he stumbled, his bad leg betraying him again and again. Twice, he sent a shower of small stones clattering down into the darkness, a sound that seemed as loud as a cannon shot in the stillness. The second time it happened, Taji stopped. She materialized out of the dark, her face a pale oval. She did not speak. She simply looked at his leg, then at his clumsy boots. Then she looked at him. Her expression was one of clear, cold calculation. She was weighing his worth. She was deciding. He realized, if he was worth the noise he was making, if it would be better, smarter, to simply leave him here. He could not blame her. "I'm sorry," he whispered, leaning against a rock, panting, "My leg, it is—" She cut him off with a sharp tish. She pointed to his boots, then to her own bare feet. She was telling him he was weak. Then she pointed up. Climb. She was not leaving him. Not yet, but it was not kindness. It was, he sensed, something else. A hard, pragmatic code. Perhaps she would not leave anyone, even an enemy, to the men like Reed. Or perhaps she just did not want to be alone. They climbed for hours. The world was a sea of blackness, the wind howling, growing colder. The first drops of rain began to fall. Not a gentle shower, but a hard, icy, driving sleet. Within minutes, Jack's coat was soaked through. The old wool, which had felt too heavy, was now a sodden, freezing weight. He was shaking, a deep, uncontrollable shivering that started in his bones. His leg was no longer on fire. It was a numb, dead thing he had to drag behind him. As they cleared a high ridge, the sleet changed. It thickened. It turned white. The wind shrieked, and suddenly they were in a blinding, swirling world of white. A high-country blizzard, appearing from nowhere, a sudden, violent ambush by the sky itself. The temperature plummeted. The wind was a physical blow, stealing his breath. He could no longer see Taji, who was only a few feet ahead. "Taji!" he called out, his voice instantly ripped away by the gale. He stumbled, falling to his knees in the rapidly deepening snow. He could not feel his hands. His face was a mask of ice. This was it. The cold was a comfort, a heavy blanket. It would be so easy to just stop, to lie down, to sleep. A shape appeared in the white. It was her. She was yelling, but he could not hear the words. He only saw the rage in her face. She grabbed his coat and pulled. He was a dead weight. "Leave me," he managed to chatter, his teeth clicking together. "Go! You can make it." She slapped him. It was not a hard blow, but the sharp, stinging impact was enough to shock him. Her face was contorted, furious. She was not going to let him die. She was not going to let him be this weak. It offended her. She screamed something he could not understand, a torrent of Apache. It was insulting. It was commanding. It was a whip. She pointed. There, through the swirling snow, was a dark shape, a shadow, an overhang of rock, a shallow cave shielded by a twisted, stunted pine. She did not help him. She shoved him, commanded him, her small, frozen hands pushing at his back until he crawled, stumbled, and fell into the shallow shelter. It was barely a depression in the rock, but it broke the wind. Taji huddled on the far side, pulling her knees to her chest, trying to make herself as small as possible. The snow piled up in a curtain just beyond their feet. The world was gone. There was only the white, screaming wind and this tiny, frozen pocket of air. They sat for a long time, the only sound the howl of the storm and the violent, uncontrollable chattering of Jack's teeth. He was dying. He knew it. The cold had settled into his core. Taji was shivering too, her whole body trembling in a fine, tight vibration. But her focus was outward, her eyes still scanning the whiteout, as if she could see the hunters, as if she could see anything at all. "We are trapped," Jack said, his voice a hoarse whisper. She did not look at him. She just stared into the storm. "He is trapped, too," she said, her voice small against the wind. "Read. He stops. He makes fire. He waits." "We have no fire," Jack said. "We have rock," she replied. He had no energy to argue. He was just so cold. He looked at her. A small, stubborn, infuriating flicker of life. He felt a desperate, foolish urge to connect, to make her see him as something other than a blue-coated ghost. "I am determined," he whispered. "To see you safe, to get you free." She finally turned her head. Her eyes, in the gray, snowy light, were ancient. "You," she said, her voice flat. "You want to save me, but you cannot save yourself." She looked at his shaking hands, his useless leg. "I am not the one who is trapped. Soldier, you have been trapped for a long time." She turned away, leaving him alone with the cold, and the storm, and the terrible, biting truth of her words. He was trying to give away a freedom he had not possessed himself in years. The world was reduced to the scream of the wind and the suffocating white. Dawn did not come. It was merely a slow, grudging dilution of the blackness into a flat, bruised gray. Jack Davis had stopped shivering. That scared him more than the cold itself. He was slipping into a warm, comfortable numbness, a dangerous, soft-edged place where the pain in his legs seemed very far away. He was leaning against the rock, his eyes half closed, the image of a fireplace in his childhood home in Pennsylvania swimming in his mind. A sharp, stabbing pain in his shoulder brought him back. He gasped, his eyes flying open. Tazi was glaring at him, her face caked with snow, her lips cracked and blue. She had jabbed him with her elbow, hard. Her eyes were not angry anymore. They were cold, cold with the pure, pragmatic focus of survival. She pointed. The wind was still howling, but the snow was thinning, the blinding curtain of white resolving into individual, stinging flakes. The storm was passing. "Up," she said. Her voice was a dry croak. I cannot feel my leg," Jack whispered. It was the truth. His left leg, from the hip down, was a block of dead wood. Taji's expression did not soften. She did not offer sympathy. She crawled over to him, her own body trembling with a violent, contained chill. She grabbed his bad leg, her small, frozen hands shockingly strong, and began to rub it, hard and brutal. She was not massaging it. She was punishing it, striking it with the heel of her hand, forcing the blood to move, forcing the nerves to scream. Jack cried out, a raw sound, as pins and needles. Then a deep, fiery ache exploded in his limb. It was the worst pain he had ever felt. It was agony. "Good," she said, seeing the tears of pain freeze on his cheeks. "You are not dead." She crawled back to the mouth of the shallow cave and looked out. The world was remade. It was a staggering, pristine, and terrible landscape of white. Every rock, every twisted pine, was draped in a heavy shroud of snow. It was beautiful, and it was a death trap. The sun was a pale, watery disk, offering light but no warmth. "He will see our tracks," Jack said, his mind clearing, the soldier in him waking up. A child could follow us. Taji nodded, her gaze sweeping the horizon. "He will follow," she said. She pointed, not down, but up, toward a high, windswept ridge above them, where the snow looked thinner, scoured by the gale. "He follows us. The wind follows him. It will cover our tracks. But we must move now." She started out, not even looking back to see if he was coming. The implication was clear. Keep up or be left. Jack pushed himself out of the hollow. The cold hit him like a physical blow. The snow was knee-deep, and with every step, his bad leg punched through the crust, jarring him, sending fresh waves of pain up his side. He was a clumsy oaf, a broken thing, and she was a shadow. Her bare feet, which should have been frozen blocks, somehow finding purchase, her thin frame moving with a desperate, animal grace. He was the protector. He had been so determined to be the one to save her. Now, he could barely save himself. He was a 200-pound anchor, and she was hauling him up a mountain. They fought the snow for an hour, a silent, grim battle. Jack's lungs were on fire. His old blue coat was a frozen board. He fell. He pushed himself up. He fell again. He was leaving a trail a blind man could follow, a deep, lurching trough in the snow. Taji, 20 yards ahead, stopped. She looked back at him, a small, dark figure against the blinding white. She was evaluating him again. He saw her look up at the ridge, then down at him, then back at the ridge. He knew what she was thinking. She could make it alone. She could move fast. She could be gone before Reed's men even broke camp. He sank to his hips in a drift, the fight gone out of him. "Go," he gasped, waving her on. "Leave me. I am just slowing you down. Go." She stood there, unmoving, for a long, terrible minute. The wind whipped her black hair across her face. He thought she would do it. He thought she would turn and vanish, and he could not blame her. It was the smart thing to do. She turned, but she did not go up. She came back. She came sliding down the drift, stopping in front of him. Her face was a mask of cold fury. She did not offer a hand. She did not offer comfort. She grabbed the front of his coat. "You die," she hissed, her voice shaking with rage and cold. "He catches me. You think he will be slow. You think he will be cold." She shook him, her small frame rattling his. "You think you are free to die. You are not. You are not. You will climb." It was not a plea. It was a command. It was the most brutal and most honest thing anyone had ever said to him. His death was not his own. His weakness was her death sentence. He had tied himself to her, and now she was lashing him to life. Shame, hot and acidic, burned through the cold. He had pitied her. He had seen himself as her savior. And here, in the snow, she was the one with the spine of forged steel, and he was the one ready to give up. He bared his teeth, a grimace of pain and renewed effort. "All right," he said. He grabbed her arm, but not for help, for balance. "All right." He used her as a crutch, a post, and he hauled himself out of the drift. He would not be her executioner. She led him to the ridge. The wind up here was a razor, but, as she had predicted, it had scoured the rock almost bare. The going was easier, but infinitely more dangerous. They were on a narrow spine of granite, 1,000-foot drop on either side. Jack, his leg numb and unreliable, had to crawl. His hands, raw and bleeding, scraped over the icy stone. This was the West. It was not the rolling fields of Virginia or the green hills of Pennsylvania. It was not a place for men at all. It was a place of high, cold, indifferent gods, a place that did not care if you lived or died. It demanded everything from you, and in return, it offered only a chance at one more breath. Taji was in her element. She was cold. She was hungry. She was hunted. But she belonged here. She pointed to a tiny tuft of brown, dead-looking weeds growing in a crack. She pulled one up, brushed the snow from the root, and bit into it. She handed one to Jack. He chewed. It was bitter, fibrous, and tasted like dirt. But it was something. It was energy. She kept him moving. When his legs seized up, she waited, her face impassive, her eyes scanning their back trail. When he slipped on the ice, she did not help him up, but she watched, making sure he did get up. The tension was no longer the sharp anger of the crevice. It was a different, tauter line. It was the pragmatic, unwilling bond of two pack animals yoked to the same, impossible load. He tried to reestablish the old order. Let me take the lead," he panted, as they started down the far side of the ridge. If someone is waiting." She just looked at him. It was not even a look of contempt. It was simple, cold logic. You cannot even walk. You would make more noise than a rock slide. You would see nothing." She did not say the words. She did not have to. She just brushed past him and started the descent. He was the soldier. He was the man. He was supposed to be the one protecting her. He clenched his fists, the raw skin of his knuckles splitting in the cold. He was desperate to do something to shield her, to prove he was not just a piece of baggage. As they reached the tree line, a thick forest of pine and fir, she stopped him, her hand shooting out, not touching him, but barring his path. She stood frozen, her head tilted, sniffing the air. "What is it?" Jack whispered, his own senses dull, his body screaming for rest. She put a finger to her lips. She pointed. Jack stared into the gloomy, snow-filled forest. He saw nothing but trees. He listened. He heard nothing but the wind in the branches. Then he saw it, a flicker of movement, gray on gray, and then another. They were not alone. A pack of wolves, lean and hungry from the long winter, had been drawn by their scent. There were 4 of them, maybe 5, moving like ghosts through the trees, circling, testing. Jack's blood ran cold. He had no gun, no knife, nothing. He automatically moved in front of Taji, his only instinct to place his larger body between her and the threat. He picked up a thick, heavy branch, half frozen into the snow, and brandished it like a club. It was a pathetic defense. The wolves stopped, 20 yards out, their yellow eyes watching. One, the leader, a large, dark male, lifted its head and let out a low, rumbling growl. They were not afraid. They were curious. They were hungry. They could smell the weakness on him. "Get back," Jack said, his voice a low growl of his own. He took a step forward. The wolves did not move. Taja stepped out from behind him. She was holding a rock, not a large one, a small, sharp-edged piece of flint. She did not look afraid. She looked annoyed. She looked at the alpha, and she shouted. It was not a scream of fear. It was a sharp, barking, arrogant command in her own language. It was a challenge. It was insulting. She took a step toward the wolf and shouted again, stamping her bare foot in the snow. The alpha's growl deepened. It bared its teeth. Jack gripped his club. "Taji, no, get back!" She ignored him. She hurled the rock. It was a perfect, fast throw. It did not hit the wolf, but it struck a tree trunk just beside its head with a loud, sharp crack. The alpha flinched, startled by the sudden, aggressive noise and the arrogance of the small, two-legged creature. The pack shifted, uneasy. This was not the behavior of prey. This was the behavior of a competitor. Taji bent, snatched up another rock, and screamed again, a raw, furious sound from deep in her chest. She was not prey. She was a warrior, and she was insulted by their presence. The wolves, faced with a limping, slow-moving meal and a small, screaming, rock-throwing demon, hesitated. They were opportunists. This was too much work. This was dangerous. The alpha gave one last, frustrated snarl, then turned and melted back into the trees. The others followed. In a second, they were gone. Jack stood, his club held uselessly, his heart pounding so hard he thought it would break his ribs. He was shaking, but not from the cold. He was in awe. He turned to look at her. She was already walking away, pushing deeper into the forest, not giving the encounter a second thought. He hurried to catch up. "That was... you were... I thought..." She glanced at him, her face impassive. "They are hungry," she said, as if stating the weather. "So are we. The forest is not for them, or us. It is just the forest." She was not just surviving. She was living in this world. She understood its rules, its language. Jack, he was just a tourist, a loud, clumsy, terrified tourist who was about to get them both killed. He stopped trying to lead. He stopped trying to protect. He just followed, putting his clumsy, booted feet into the small, perfect tracks she left in the snow. His entire being focused on one simple, humiliating task: keeping up. The forest floor was a trap of hidden roots and soft, deep drifts beneath the snow-covered pines. Every step was a fresh calculation of pain for Jack Davis. His bad leg was a 1,000-pound weight of dull, throbbing misery, and his respect for the small, silent woman ahead of him had grown into a kind of grudging awe. She had faced down the storm, the cold, and the wolves with a competence that shamed his own clumsy survival. He was no longer the protector. He was the baggage. He was so focused on placing his feet in her precise, light tracks that he did not sense the change. Tazi did. She stopped so abruptly he almost stumbled into her. Her head was up. Her nostrils flared, like a deer testing a dangerous wind. What he whispered, his own senses completely blunt. She did not answer. She put a finger to her lips and pointed, not with her hand, but with her chin, to the left, down a steep, wooded embankment. Jack listened. He heard nothing but the sifting of snow from the high branches. He sniffed. The air was sharp, clean, smelling only of pine and cold. "Smoke," she breathed, the word a cloud of vapor in front of her face. "A fire. Low?" He sniffed again, desperate to catch it. And then he did. A faint, greasy tang, almost imperceptible, layering itself under the smell of the pines. A human smell. "Reed," he whispered, his stomach clenching. "He is ahead of us." Taji shook her head. A small, sharp negative. No, not his. This is different. This fire is old, hidden. A flicker of desperate, foolish hope lit in Jack's chest. Warmth. Food. Maybe even help. They were freezing, starving. They could not keep going like this. Reed was behind them. The wilderness was all around them. Perhaps this was a trapper's cabin, a mining camp. Someone. Neutral. "We have to see," Jack said, his voice low. We need warmth, or we will not last another night." She turned to him, her eyes as flat and hard as river stones. "Fire is men. Men are Reed. There is no one who is, neutral. For me," she touched her own chest. "For us." "But we cannot keep running," he argued, the desperation making his voice crack. "We are dying out here. I am dying out here. We have to take a chance." She looked at him, her gaze lingering on his shaking hands, his ice-caked coat, his useless leg. She was weighing the options, the certain slow death of the cold, or the possible, fast death of an encounter. Her eyes told him she preferred the cold, but she could see he would not make it. He was the liability. His weakness was forcing her hand. She gave a curt, angry nod. She did not move toward the smoke. She began to move around it, a wide, silent circle, climbing higher on the slope to look down. She moved from tree to tree, a shadow, and he lumbered after her, trying to mimic her silence. But his every step was a crunch, his breathing a ragged pant. She found a spot, a thicket of fir that gave them a clear view down into a small, sheltered bowl. It was a perfect hideout. The smoke was coming from a pipe stuck out of the earth, a crude chimney for a dugout, a hole carved into the side of the hill and roofed with logs and earth. The snow on the roof was mostly melted. And there were men. 3 of them. They were not Reed's men. These were rougher, dirtier, their clothes a patchwork of stolen hides and filthy wool. They looked like the dregs of a mining camp, or deserters, outlaws. A fire guttered in a ring of stones near the dugout's entrance, and a pot of something hung over it. Horses, lean and mean-looking, were tied in a nearby thicket. One of the men, a thick, bearded brute with a greasy fur hat, was cleaning a rifle. The other 2 were arguing, their voices a low, angry rumble that did not carry. "We go," Taji whispered, already backing away. "Now." "Wait," Jack said. He had seen something. One of the horses, a fine-looking bay, had a brand on its flank, a brand he recognized. It was the brand of a rancher near Fort Laramie, a man who had supplied the army, and he had heard, just before his discharge, that a gang had hit that ranch, taking horses and killing 2 ranch hands. These were not just trappers. They were killers. Taja pulled at his sleeve, her patience gone, now. But it was too late. Jack's bad leg, numb and uncooperative, chose that exact moment to betray him. His foot slipped on a patch of icy pine needles hidden beneath the snow. He did not just stumble. He fell, hard. He grabbed for a branch, but it snapped, and he went crashing, rolling, sliding down the steep, snow-covered embankment. He was a one-man avalanche, a cascade of snow, broken branches, and curses. He tumbled out onto the flat, snowy floor of the clearing and slammed to a stop not 10 feet from the fire, landing in a heap at the feet of the man with the fur hat. Taji had no choice. She was right behind him, and his fall had exposed their position. She slid down after him, landing on her feet with the grace of a cat, but it did not matter. They were there. The clearing went dead silent. The 3 men, startled, had frozen. Now, all 3 had weapons in their hands. The man in the fur hat, clearly the leader, looked at Jack, who was a gasping, snow-covered wreck. Then he looked at Taji, who was standing, poised, her eyes scanning everything, her face a mask of cold composure. "Well, now, Milo," one of the other men said, a skinny, weasel-faced man. "Look what the snow just spat out." Milo, the leader, slowly stood up. He was a big man, smelling of unwashed bodies, stale whiskey, and old blood. His eyes were small and intelligent. He looked at Jack. "Soldier?" He grunted, seeing the coat, broke down by the looks of it. Then his gaze shifted to Taji. He looked at her, and his eyes widened. He stared. A slow, greasy smile spread across his face, revealing broken, yellow teeth. "By God," he whispered, almost in reverence. "Weasel. Do you know who that is?" Weasel squinted. "Just some Apache. Squaw, Milo. Lost, maybe." "You are a fool," Milo growled, never taking his eyes off Taji. "I saw that bounty man, Reed, in purgatory. He was asking, he was describing, he was offering $200, just for word of her." Milo's smile widened. "He said she was the daughter of Ende, said she was a prize, said she was worth 1,000, easy." He looked at Taji as if she were a solid gold ingot that had just fallen from the sky. Milo, the third man, a quiet, scarred man, said, "Reed's hunting her. That means trouble." "That means profit," Milo corrected him. He looked at Jack. "And look, she comes with a... What are you, soldier, her protector?" He laughed, a short, ugly bark. "You did all the hard work for us. Reed's been tracking her for a month. And you just deliver her. I thank you." Jack struggled to get up, pushing himself onto his elbows. His chest ached from the fall. He had, in one clumsy, idiotic moment, led them from a wilderness of ice into a pit of vipers. She is not for sale," Jack managed to pant. Milo laughed again. "Everything is for sale, old man. And you ain't in a position to bargain." He jerked his head at Weasel. "Tie the girl up. Put a bullet in the soldier. He is done." Weasel grinned and started forward. Jack knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that this was it. This was the end. He was not just going to die. He was going to die having accomplished nothing, having made everything worse. He looked at Taji. She was watching Weasel approach, her body coiled. He had a choice. He could die lying in the snow, or he could die standing. He had no weapon, only the branch he had picked up to face the wolves, which was still, miraculously, clutched in his frozen hand. "Taji," he said, his voice low and clear. "When I move, run. Head for the rocks. Do not look back. Do not—" He was giving his last order. He was trying, one last time, to be her savior. He did not wait for her reply. With a roar that was half grief, half rage, Jack surged up from the snow, his bad leg forgotten. He swung the heavy branch, not at Weasel, but at Milo, the leader, the brain, cut off the head. It was a desperate, suicidal charge. Milo, surprised by the sudden attack, raised his rifle to block the blow. The branch connected with the rifle barrel with a crack that vibrated up Jack's arms. Weasel, startled, turned back from Taji and fumbled for his pistol. The third man, the scarred one, calmly raised his own rifle to shoot Jack in the back. This was the moment. Jack saw the rifle coming up. He had bought her 3 seconds. He braced for the bullet. It never came. A high, inhuman scream ripped through the clearing. Jack, in the middle of his struggle with Milo, glanced over. Taji had not run. When the scarred man had raised his rifle, she had moved. She had snatched the pot of boiling, greasy stew from the hook over the fire and, with a two-handed, desperate heave, had thrown the entire contents into the man's face. He was screaming, his hands clawing at his scalded skin, his rifle firing uselessly into the sky as he fell. Weasel, his pistol finally clear, turned to fire at her. She was not there. She had used the motion of her throw to duck and roll, coming up inside his reach. He fired, the shot going wild. Before he could fire again, she grabbed the hunting knife from the sheath on his belt. A single, fluid, violent motion. She had a weapon. The clearing exploded into pure chaos. Jack, seeing his sacrifice, had just become a desperate three-way brawl, renewed his attack. He was no longer trying to die. He was trying to win. He slammed his head into Milo's face. The big man grunted, blood pouring from his nose, and shoved Jack back, raising his rifle like a club. Weasel was grappling with Taji, but he was fighting a brawler. And she was a warrior. She was not trying to punch. She was trying to kill. She held the knife in a reverse grip and, as he grabbed her, she drove her elbow into his stomach and raked the knife blade across his arm. He bellowed, his grip loosening. She did not retreat. She stabbed. A short, vicious, upward thrust. Jack saw it all in a fractured, terrifying second. He saw Milo swinging the rifle at his head. He ducked. The stock whistled past his ear. He drove his shoulder into the big man's stomach. They both went down, rolling in the snow and the mud. Two big, clumsy animals, punching, kicking, gouging. Milo was stronger. His thick hands found Jack's throat. He began to squeeze. Black spots danced in Jack's vision. He was losing. He was weak. He was a failure. He heard another scream, this one short, a wet gurgle. The crushing pressure on his throat vanished. Jack gasped, the air returning to his lungs in a painful, sobbing rush. He rolled over, coughing. Milo was on his hands and knees, his back arched. His head was down. He was trying to say something, but only a bloody foam came from his lips. Taji stood over him. The hunting knife was in her hand, red to the hilt. She had driven it deep into Milo's back, just under the ribs, finding the life of him. She pulled the blade free. Milo collapsed face first into the snow, twitched, and was still. Weasel was on the ground, clutching his stomach, his eyes wide with shock, blood pooling around him. The man with the scalded face was still writhing, his moans a high, thin sound. It was over. It had taken less than a minute. Silence fell, heavy and sudden. The only sounds were the hiss of the fire, the moans of the burned man, and Jack's ragged, raw breathing. He looked at Taji. She was standing in the center of the carnage, her small body trembling with the aftershock of adrenaline. Her face was spattered with blood. Her dress was torn. She held the bloody knife in her hand, its point toward the ground. She was not a girl. She was not a victim. She was the most terrifying and the most competent human being he had ever met. She had not needed his protection. She had not waited for his sacrifice. She had seen the threat, assessed her options, and she had won. She had saved his life. The last, stubborn vestiges of his pride, his identity as the soldier, the protector, the white man, crumbled into dust. He had done nothing but bring them to this disaster, and she had been the one to carve their way out. She looked at the moaning, burned man. Her face was hard. She took a step toward him, raising the knife. "No!" Jack gasped, finding his voice. "Leave him! Let him be! We have to go!" She looked at him, her eyes questioning. Why leave an enemy? "Reed," Jack forced out. "The name a spur. He will hear the shots, the screaming. He will know. We have to go." The name Reed was the only one that mattered. That was the real hunt. This was just a bloody interruption. Taji's expression did not soften, but she understood the logic. She gave the writhing man a final look of cold disgust. She bent, wiped the knife on Milo's fur hat, and then, in a decisive, practical motion, slid it into the waistband of her dress. It was her weapon now. She walked over to Jack. He was still on his knees, trying to get his breath, his legs screaming. He tried to push himself up, but his leg buckled, and he fell back. He was spent. She stood over him, a small, bloody, and indomitable figure. She looked at him for a long moment, this big, broken, useless man she was now tied to. She did not offer a hand. She did not offer sympathy. She grabbed the collar of his coat, her grip like a vice, and hauled him to his feet. "You are heavy, soldier," she said, her voice a flat, exhausted rasp. Then she turned and walked away from the ruined camp, heading deeper into the forest, not looking back. Jack, aching in every part of his body, his throat raw, and his entire worldview shattered, limped after her. He was no longer following a victim. He was following his rescuer. There was no time for shock. There was no time for horror. The echo of the gunshots, the screams, the wet, final gurgle of Milo's death. These sounds were a dinner bell. Jack Davis knew it. Reed would be coming. The sounds would carry for miles in the cold, clear air. Taji knew it too. She was not frozen. She was not trembling. She was a whirlwind of pure, pragmatic motion. The burned man was still moaning, but she ignored him as if he were a whining dog. She ran to the dugout. Jack, his legs screaming, his body a mass of bruises, pushed himself to his feet and stumbled after her. "We have to go," he panted, stating the obvious, the useless. "We need," she said, her voice a low, hard command. She was already inside the stinking, dark hole. She emerged a second later, her arms full. She had a full canteen, slung over her shoulder. She had a long strip of blackened, dried meat. She had Weasel's pistol, a heavy dragoon model, and his ammunition belt. She shoved them at Jack. "You," she said. It was not a question. It was an order. "You are the soldier. You use this." He took the gun, his hands clumsy, his fingers stiff with cold. The weight of it was both a comfort and a reproach. He had given his own away. She had just taken this one, with blood. She did not wait. She grabbed a greasy wool blanket from the dugout entrance, heedless of the filth, and wrapped it around her own shoulders. It was a grotesque, oversized poncho, but it was warmth. She kept the bloody knife, tucking it into the rope belt she had salvaged. She looked at the horses, a flicker of consideration in her eyes. "No time," Jack said, reading her mind. "He will be on us. We stay on the rocks." She nodded, a curt dip of her chin. She had already come to the same conclusion. She ran, not back the way they had come, but deeper into the forest, angling up, always up, toward the high, broken ridges. And Jack followed. He was a different man now. He was not her protector. He was not her guide. He was her wounded, heavy-footed rearguard. He was the man with the gun, and she was the one with the will. They moved for an hour, a brutal, heart-pounding climb. Jack's world shrank to the small, blanket-wrapped figure in front of him, and the agonizing rhythmic stabbing of his leg. The snow thinned as they climbed, giving way to wind-scoured slick rock, a treacherous, icy stone that offered no purchase. Behind them, they heard it, a single, clear, angry shout. It was far below, but it was coming. "Reed!" "He is fast," Jack panted, leaning against an icy boulder. "He found the camp." "He found the bodies," Taji said, her voice flat. She looked up. The ridge they were on was narrowing, coming to a high, tight pass. Boulders, large as wagons, were scattered, creating a natural fortress. "Here," she said. It was not a place to rest. It was a place to make a stand. She was done running. She did not ask for his opinion. She scrambled up into the highest notch, a narrow gap between two granite towers that commanded a view of the entire, icy slope they had just climbed. There was only one way up, a treacherous, open sheet of rock. Jack clambered after her, his breath sobbing in his throat. He sank down behind a low wall of rock, his leg giving out completely. He was done. He could not go another step. "This is it," he gasped. "Yes," she said. She was not afraid. She was ready. She crouched beside him, pulling the blanket tighter. A small, grim figure. She looked at the pistol in his lap. "You shoot," she said. "I will," he said. He fumbled with the gun, checking the load. 6 rounds, 6 chances. He was a soldier. He had been a good shot, but his hands were shaking so badly he could hardly hold the barrel steady. "They come," she whispered. He looked far below. 3 figures were starting up the slope. Reed, his flat-brimmed hat unmistakable. With him was the man from the alley, Finch, and one other. They were spreading out, moving cautiously, rifles ready. They had seen the tracks. They knew their prey was cornered. Jack rested the heavy pistol barrel on the rock. He tried to steady his breathing. He tried to find the cold, calm place he used to go to in a battle. That quiet room in his mind where there was only the target, the trigger, and the breath. It was not there. There was only the cold, and the pain, and the small, fierce woman beside him. The men climbed. They were halfway up when Reed shouted, his voice echoing off the stone. "Soldier Davis, I know you were up there." Jack did not answer. "You are finished. You are crippled, and you are with a fugitive. I have 2 rifles here. You have nothing. You killed those men. That is a hanging offense." "He is lying," Taji said, her voice low. "He wants us to talk, so he can see where we are." "I know," Jack whispered. "Give me the girl," Davis Reed shouted again, his voice rising in anger. He was getting closer, moving from boulder to boulder. "I will let you walk away. I will tell them she did it, that she killed Milo. You were her captive. I will give you my word." "His word is dirt," Taji murmured. "I know," Jack said again. He raised the pistol, trying to get a sight on Reed, but the man was staying behind cover. Finch, the man from the alley, was the one moving, scrambling up the rock face, trying to get a flanking angle. He was 50 yards out. "He is mine," Jack said. He lined up the shot. He let out a slow breath. He squeezed the trigger. The explosion of the dragoon was deafening. It slammed Jack's shoulder back against the rock. The bullet screamed down the slope. Finch cried out, a high, thin sound, and grabbed his shoulder. He did not fall, but he scrambled back behind a rock, out of sight. "On," Jack said, his hand stinging. "Good," Taji said, nodding, as if he were a student who had completed a simple task. "Damn you," Davis Reed roared. The sound was pure fury. A rifle cracked, and a bullet zipped over their heads with a sharp whoosh. They were pinned. "Now," Reed yelled. "Sipes, go get up there, kill him." The third man, Sipes, broke from cover. He was fast. He was not taking the main path. He was running along the base of the rock wall, heading for a chimney, a vertical crack that Jack had not even seen. He was a climber. "He is yours," Jack said, turning, trying to get an angle. But he could not. The man was too close, protected by the overhang. I cannot see him." "I can," Taji said. She stood up. "Taji, no, get down," Jack yelled. She did not listen. She was not a soldier who hid behind cover. She was a warrior. She stood in the open, on the high ledge, the wool blanket falling from her shoulders, the wind whipping her black hair. She held the bloody knife in her hand. She was waiting for him. Sipes came up over the ledge like a spider, his rifle in one hand. He saw her. He grinned, thinking this was the easy part. He lunged, trying to grab her, to use her as a shield. Jack screamed, a wordless sound of terror. He tried to get the pistol around, but he would hit her. He watched, helpless. As the fight happened, it was not a fight. It was an execution. Taji did not retreat. She did not brawl. She moved. As Sipes lunged, she was not there. She sidestepped, letting his own momentum carry him past her. As he stumbled, off balance, she moved with him, her body low. She brought the knife up, not in a wild stab, but in a short, hard, economical thrust, driving it deep into his side, under his ribs, just as she had with Milo. Sipes grunted, his eyes wide with a terrible, final surprise. He stopped. He looked down at the knife handle protruding from his coat, as if he could not understand what it was. He looked at Taji. She met his gaze, her face cold, and pulled the blade free. He did not fall. He just settled. He crumpled, slid down the rock, and lay still. Taji turned, not even breathing hard, and calmly walked back to her position behind the rock. She picked up the blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders, her eyes already scanning the rocks below for the next threat. Jack stared at her. His mouth was open. His heart was a hammer. He was sitting in the presence of something ancient, something he did not and could not understand. She had just killed a man, a big, armed man, with a skill and a coldness that chilled him to his very soul. She was not a girl. She was not a victim he had rescued from a muddy alley. He had not saved her. He looked at his own shaking hands. He looked at his useless leg. He looked at the smoking pistol. He was a soldier, a man trained in the art of killing, and his hands were trembling. She was a savage girl, barefoot and cold, and she was as steady as the granite they were hiding in. His entire world, his entire understanding of himself, tilted and fell apart. He had walked into that alley in Purgatory Flat feeling, what pity shame, a vague foolish, white man's sense of honor. He had seen a damsel in distress, a creature to be saved. He had thrown his last dollar, his last shred of security, onto a grand, romantic gesture. He was the knight. She was the captive. He had been a fool, a blind, arrogant, magnificent fool. Tazi was not a captive. She was a warrior. She had been a warrior in that alley, her eyes fixed on the mountains, her spirit unbroken. She had been a warrior in the blizzard, lashing him to life with her rage. She had been a warrior when she faced the wolves, and she had just proven it, with a bloody knife and a cold, steady hand. He had not saved her. He had, by pure stumbling accident, given her an opening. He had bought her a chance. He had, in his bumbling attempt to be a savior, managed to do one useful thing. He had gotten her out of that rope. And now, she had a knife. He had thought freedom was a thing he could give her, a gift, a transaction, $20 and a gun. He looked at her, at the blood drying on her hand, at the cold, flat determination in her eyes as she watched for Reed. He was wrong. Freedom was not a gift. Freedom was a knife. It was a rock. It was a scream of defiance. It was a willingness to kill and to die, rather than to be caged. It was not something to be given. It was something to be taken. He felt a deep, profound, and agonizing shame. He had not been her rescuer. He had been an insult. He, with his pity, had been just one more man trying to own her, just in a different, gentry. "He is still there," Taji said, her voice pulling him back. Jack looked. Reed was still down there, trapped, but so were they. "He will not come up," Jack said, his voice hoarse. "Not alone. He will wait for us." "We will not wait," Taji said. She looked at Jack. She saw the change in his eyes. She saw the broken pride and the new, raw, terrified respect. She did not smile. She did not offer comfort. She simply nodded, a small, quick acknowledgement. He finally saw. He finally understood. "I have 4 shots," Jack said, his voice steadying. He was no longer her protector. He was her soldier. "What is the plan?" Taji looked at the setting sun, the light turning the snow to a pale, bloody pink. "He is cold," she said. "We are cold, but he is one. We are 2. He will make a mistake. You will shoot, or I will. Go." She gestured with the knife. She was willing to go down there. Jack looked at this small, impossible woman. He felt a pain that was not in his leg, or his ribs. It was in his chest. It was the pain of watching something beautiful and terrible, something he could never be and never truly understand. She was not waiting for rescue. She was a person, whole and entire, saving herself. He was just a witness. The sun bled out of the world, leaving the high rocks in a deep, freezing purple. The wind was a low, mournful sound, a ghost's whisper across the granite. Down below, there was no movement. Reed was a shadow among shadows, a patient, venomous thing. But he was one man, and he was cold. They heard him go. It was not a sound, but a void, the faint, scraping noise of a boot on rock. And then a deeper silence. He had retreated. He had pulled back down the slope to wait for morning, to wait for them to freeze, or to die of thirst, or to make a mistake. "He is gone," Jack whispered, his words a plume of white. He did not relax. It was not over. It was a pause. "He is not gone," Taji said. "He is waiting." She was right. He was at the bottom of the slope, like a wolf at the base of a tree, waiting for the opossum to tire. But for now, for the night, they were safe. The immediate, heart-pounding threat had receded, leaving behind a cold, vast, and aching emptiness. Taji slid back from the lip of the rock, her blanket clutched around her. She found a deeper niche in the granite, a space partially shielded from the wind by a high, overhanging slab. It was not a cave, it was just a deeper shadow. She sank down into it, her back against the stone, and pulled her knees to her chest. Jack crawled after her. His leg was a single, monstrous, frozen nerve. He collapsed more than sat, his body finally surrendering to the full, crushing weight of its exhaustion and its wounds. His ribs ached where Milo had kicked him. His throat was raw from the man's grip. His hands were numb, clumsy claws. They sat in silence. The world was black and silver, the snow on the distant peaks gleaming under a sliver of moon. The only sound was the wind. Jack was shaking. The adrenaline was gone, and the cold was seeping back in, deep and final. He was a broken instrument, his strings all snapped. He looked at Taji. She was sitting 3 feet away, a small, huddled shape, her eyes open, staring out into the blackness. He saw her shiver, a violent, rattling tremor that shook her whole frame. She was not immune. She was just enduring. The sight of her, this small, indomitable warrior, shaking in the dark, broke something in him. The last wall. It was not pity. He would never make that mistake again. It was connection, a raw, painful, shared humanity. "We are alive," he said, the words sounding hollow and stupid. She did not look at him. "Today," she said. He remembered the food. The thought of it was almost repellent, but he knew they had to. He fumbled inside his frozen coat, his fingers wooden. He pulled out the strip of dried, blackened meat she had taken from the dugout. It was stiff as a board, cold and greasy. He pulled out the canteen. He held the meat out to her. "We have to eat." She looked at the meat, then at him. Her eyes, in the faint moonlight, were deep and unreadable. She did not take it. You saved my life," Jack said, his voice a low, rough rasp. Back there, with Milo. I was finished. You saved me." She just watched him. "I was a fool," he went on, the confession tearing out of him, a need to make it plain, to name the thing that had shattered. "In the town, I thought I was rescuing you." He laughed, a short, bitter, painful sound. "I was just a different kind of trouble. I was proud." He looked down at the pistol in his lap. You are the one who... You are the warrior. I am just the man with the bad leg." For the first time, her expression changed. It was not a softening. It was a flicker of curiosity, a reevaluation. She was seeing him, really seeing him, for the first time, not as a blue-coated symbol of her people's destruction, not as a clumsy, weak, white man burden, but as this, a broken man, admitting he was broken. "You are heavy," she said. It was not an insult this time. It was just a fact, like stating the rock was hard. "I know," he said. "But you shot," she said, nodding toward the slope. "The man, Finch. You shot well." It was the smallest, driest, most profound compliment he had ever received. It was a soldier's praise. It was equality. "I was a soldier," he said, "a long time ago. I was good at that." "Yes," she said. She understood. He held out the meat again. Eat. You are shaking. This time, she reached out. Her small, frozen fingers brushed his. The contact was a jolt, a shock of static electricity, a sudden, sharp reminder of life. She took the meat. She did not have a knife. She had slid the bloody one into her waistband. She had Sipes's knife. He had Weasel's pistol. They were an arsenal of dead men's things. She pulled the knife, and with a practical, strong movement, sawed off a piece of the tough meat. She chewed it, her face impassive, her jaw working. Then she sawed off another piece and held it out to him. He took it. It was a sharing, not a gift, not a rescue, a division of spoils, a partnership. He chewed the meat. It was salty and tough and tasted of smoke and old grease. It was the best meal of his life. It was fuel. It was tomorrow. He uncapped the canteen. He drank, the water so cold it stung his throat, and then handed it to her. She drank, her head tilted back, her throat moving. They were sharing breath. They were sharing life. They ate in silence for a few minutes. The food, as terrible as it was, began to work. A tiny, fragile core of warmth ignited in Jack's stomach. The shaking in his hands eased. Taji finished her piece and looked at him. Her eyes were different now. The cold, flat blade of her mistrust was still there, but it was altered. It was no longer directed at him. It was directed at the world. He was now, somehow, inside the circle of her defense, not outside it. You are Apache, he said, stating the obvious. My people. We did terrible things. Yes, she said, and yours. He blinked. Mine. You are broken, she said, not with pity, but with observation. She tapped her own temple, then her chest. Your war, it broke you, before your leg. He had no defense. She saw him as clearly as she saw the wind. Yes, he whispered. You came to the town, she said, thinking it through, speaking slowly. You had $1 and a gun. You gave them for me. Why? He had given her the first false answer, the one about his shame. Now, he had to find the true one. He thought, digging past the pride, past the guilt. What was left? I do not know, he said, and it was the most honest thing he had ever said. I saw you in the alley. You were looking at the mountains. You were not beaten. You were still, you, everyone else, in this whole damned country. They are all beaten, or they are the ones doing the beating, or they are just ghosts, like me. But you, he shook his head, unable to find the words. You were alive. I think I wanted to be near that. I think I wanted to see what it looked like. She held his gaze for a long time. The wind moaned. She was processing this. This was not the answer of a man trying to wash his hands. This was not the answer of a man trying to buy his way into heaven. It was the answer of a drowning man, reaching for a solid log. You did not save me, she said, her voice quiet. I know, he said. You saved me twice. I did not save you, she corrected. A sharp, quick disagreement. I stopped you from dying. You are a burden. It is easier if you can walk and shoot. He should have been insulted, but he was not. He grinned, a crack of his frozen lips. I will try to be a more useful burden. A flicker, a tiny, almost invisible upturn at the corner of her mouth. It was not a smile. It was the idea of a smile. And it was gone. She finished her meat and carefully wrapped the remainder, tucking it away. She pulled the filthy, greasy blanket tighter. She was still shivering. Jack looked at her. He looked at the 3 feet of empty, freezing rock between them. He was a man. She was a woman. An Apache woman. He was a white soldier. The distance between them was a canyon, 1,000 miles wide, filled with a century of blood and lies. But they were also just two people, on a high cold rock, with armed men waiting below. "We will freeze," he said, his voice practical, stripping every other meaning from the words. "If we sit apart, we will die. Both of us." She knew it. Her pragmatic, survivalist mind knew the truth of it. He held his breath. He was not asking for comfort. He was proposing an alliance, a treaty. She looked at him, her eyes searching his. She was looking for the lie. She was looking for the deceit, the weakness, the hidden, ugly thing that white men always carried. He held her gaze. He put all the new, raw, broken honesty of himself into his eyes. "I am not him. I am not the man from the alley. I am just Jack, and I am cold." After a long, long minute, she gave a single, curt nod. He shifted, his body a map of pain, moving across the rock. He sat beside her, their shoulders touching. The contact was electric. He could feel the fine, hard tremor of her shivering. He was shivering, too. He was the bigger of the two. He awkwardly, clumsily, lifted his arm and put it around her, pulling her against his side. It was not a lover's embrace. It was not an act of possession. It was a huddle. It was two animals in a storm, sharing warmth. Nothing more. She was stiff. For a full minute, her entire body was rigid, a coiled spring, ready to explode, to put the knife in his ribs. He just sat, his arm around her, his own body trembling, and waited. Then, slowly, a fraction of an inch at a time, the tension bled out of her. She did not relax. She did not lean into him. She allowed it. She accepted it. She accepted his warmth. And she, in turn, was a small, vital furnace against his aching ribs. He was in pain. He was exhausted. He was hunted, but as he sat there in the freezing dark, with this small, dangerous, and impossible woman tucked against his side, her breath a small cloud in front of her face, Jack Davis felt, for the first time since before the war, that he was not entirely alone. He realized she was not just sharing his warmth, she was sharing his watch. Her head was up, her eyes were open, and she was scanning the darkness below. They were a single, two-headed, four-eyed creature, watching for the wolf. He had not found love. He had not found rescue. He had found a partner, someone to share the burden. And as he sat there, he began to understand. This was it. This was the only thing that mattered. Not the grand gestures, not the words. Just this. The shared meat, the shared watch, the shared warmth. The decision to be together against the cold and the dark. Dawn was not a birth. It was a wound. A slow, gray seepage of light that stained the eastern sky, revealing a world of ice, granite, and death. The cold had settled deep into their bones, a permanent, aching resident. The shared warmth had kept them from freezing, but just barely. Jack Davis felt as if his very blood had turned to slush. His arm, wrapped around Tazi's small, unyielding frame, was a dead thing, a log of frozen meat. He stirred, and the movement sent 1,000 knives of pain through his body. Every joint, every muscle, every old wound screamed in protest. Beside him, Tazi moved, not with a start, but with a fluid, instant awareness. She was awake. She had never truly been asleep. She slid from his embrace, not with coyness or with anger, but with the practical, impersonal motion of a soldier leaving a shared foxhole. The fragile, desperate intimacy of the night was gone, burned away by the cold light of day. In its place was the grim, shared business of survival. She moved to the lip of their granite fortress, a small, dark silhouette against the vast, pale world. She was wrapped in Milo's filthy blanket, the bloody knife tucked into her waistband. She scanned the slope below. Jack crawled after her, his bad leg a monstrous, alien thing he had to drag. He unholstered the heavy pistol, its metal so cold it burned his hand. He had 4 shots left. He rested the barrel on the rock, his body trembling, not from fear, but from a cold so profound it was shaking the very foundations of him. They were a team, a broken, freezing, and desperate team. "He is there," she said. Her voice was a dry, colorless rasp. Jack squinted. At the bottom of the long, icy slope, where the first stunted pines began, a thin curl of blue smoke rose into the still air. Reed. He had made a fire. He was comfortable. He was waiting. He was the cat, and they were the mice, trapped in the wall. "He will not wait long," Jack said. "He knows we are finished if we stay here. He will force it." "Yes," she said. As if summoned by the words, a figure emerged from the trees. It was Finch, the man Jack had shot in the shoulder. He was moving slowly, his arm in a crude sling, his rifle held awkwardly in his good hand. He was not climbing. He was moving out onto the open snow, a clear, deliberate target. Then came the voice, Reed's voice, amplified by the cold, clear air bouncing off the rock walls. "Morning, soldier, a cold night to die. I am a generous man. My offer from yesterday, it is off the table. You are dead men, but I will give you a choice. Send the girl down now, unarmed, and I will let you, and my wounded man, take your chances. Maybe you make it, maybe the wolves get you, I do not care." Finch was standing in the open, 150 yards down, a long shot for a pistol, even a heavy one. "He is using him," Jack whispered, his mind, slow and cold, working through the tactics. "He is bait. He wants me to waste a shot. He wants to see where I am." "Or," Taji said, her eyes narrow, "he is one, and Reed is two." She was right. Reed was not in the camp. The smoke was a lie. The smoke was a distraction. Reed was already moving. Taji's head snapped to the right, toward the vertical chimney that Sipes had tried to climb. "There," she breathed. Jack looked. He saw nothing, just rock and ice. "Where?" "Listen." He listened. Above the low moan of the wind, he heard it, a faint, rhythmic scrape, 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 the sound of a boot, seeking purchase. Reed was not attacking up the main slope. He was a hunter. He was flanking them. He was climbing the chimney, the one Jack could not cover, the one Tazi had defended yesterday. The final battle was here. They were trapped between Finch, the visible bait, and Reed, the invisible, climbing threat. Jack looked at Taji. He saw no fear. He saw only a cold, sharp, terrible clarity. She was not a victim. She was not a girl to be saved. She was his partner. They were not protector and protected. They were two warriors fighting for their one shared life. "He is mine," she said. She did not mean Finch. She meant Reed. She pulled the knife. She was going to meet him, just as she had met Sipes. "No," Jack said. The word a croak. "He is not Sipes. He is Reed. He is smart. He is fast. He will be waiting for you. He wants you to come." He looked at his own trembling hands. He looked at his useless leg. He could not move. He was an anchor, a turret. And in that moment, the final, painful, beautiful realization struck him. He had been so wrong about everything. He had thought, in that muddy alley, that freedom was a thing he could buy for $20 and a gun. He had thought it was a gift he could bestow. He, the great, civilized white soldier, would give this poor savage her life back. He looked at Tazi, at the blood caked under her fingernails, at the old, cold fury in her eyes. Freedom was not a gift. It was not an idea. It was not a word on a piece of paper. Freedom was the ice on this rock. It was the pain in his leg. It was the 4 bullets in his gun and the bloody knife in her hand. It was the willingness to climb into a blizzard, to face down wolves, to kill or be killed in a dirty, snow-filled dugout. Freedom was not something you were given. It was a thing you took. It was a thing you earned. Every single second. With your life. With your blood. With your very soul. It was a choice. Made over and over, to stand rather than to kneel. He had not freed her. He had, by the blind, stumbling luck of a fool, put a weapon back in her hand, and she had been freeing herself ever since. And sacrifice. He had been so ready to sacrifice himself, to charge Milo, to die in a blaze of what stupid, pointless glory. He had thought sacrifice was a grand, dramatic act of dying. He looked at his useless leg. He looked at the path Reed was climbing. He looked at Taji. He was wrong about that, too. Sacrifice was not dying. It was living. It was sitting on this cold, miserable rock, crippled and shaking, and doing the one small, necessary thing he could do. It was trusting her. It was his turn to be the anvil. "You are right," he said, his voice suddenly, surprisingly, steady. "You go. He is yours. He will be fast, but you are faster." She looked at him, surprised. "He thinks I am alone," Jack said. "He thinks you are running, or you are dead. But I am not alone." He turned his full attention to the slope below, to Finch. "I will keep him busy. I will be the distraction." It was the ultimate reversal. He was the bait. She was the hunter. Taji looked at him. One long, final assessment. She saw the change. She saw the broken pride was gone, replaced by a cold, simple, soldier's resolve. He was finally, truly, her partner. She nodded, once, and she was gone. She did not run. She vanished, a gray, blanket-wrapped ghost, moving over the rocks toward the chimney, her knife in her hand. Jack was alone, but he was not. He was part of a plan. He had a job. He turned his attention to Finch. The man was still standing there, a pathetic, cold figure. Jack felt a flicker of pity. He was just a pawn. "Finch!" Jack yelled, his voice cracking in the wind. The man startled and raised his rifle. "Reed is gone. Finch!" Jack yelled, the lie coming easily. "He left you. He is running. You are alone." "Liar!" Finch screamed back, but his voice was thin, frightened. "He is gone," Jack shouted. "He took the last of the food. He is riding out. He left you here to die, to keep me busy." He had to make Finch move. He had to make noise. He had to draw all the attention to himself. He raised the heavy pistol and fired. Not at Finch, but at a rock just above his head. Boom! The shot echoed like a cannon. Finch cried out, terrified, and scrambled for cover. "Reed, Reed!" "He cannot hear you," Jack roared. He fired again. Boom! This time, the bullet kicked up snow at Finch's feet. The man yelped and started to run, stumbling back toward the trees. Jack's distraction was working. He was a one-man army, making a fool of himself, making a racket. He was pulling all the focus, all the sound, to his side of the mountain. He heard a sound from above, a scrape, a curse, and then a single, high, cut-off scream. Jack's blood went cold. He did not know if it was hers or Reed's. He had to trust her. He had to do his job. He kept yelling at Finch, who was now in full, panicked retreat. Then silence. The true, deep, high country silence. Finch was gone. The wind had dropped. There was nothing. Jack waited. His heart was a stone in his chest. His job was done. Now he was just waiting. A figure appeared on the high ledge above the chimney. It was Taji. She was standing there, outlined against the pale, gray sky. She was not bloody. She was not wounded. She was just standing. She looked down at him. In her hand was her knife. In her other hand was Reed's rifle. She had won. She just stood there, watching him. And Jack Davis, crippled, freezing, and for the first time in his life, completely, devastatingly, wonderfully free, began to laugh. It was a raw, painful, sobbing laugh, a sound of madness and relief. They were not protector and protected. They were not savior and saved. They were two warriors, and they had just won their war. She looked at him, her face impassive. Then she raised the rifle, just slightly, in a silent soldier's salute. The laughter died in Jack's throat, turning into a raw, hacking cough that tore at his ribs. The world, which had contracted to a single point of granite and adrenaline, now rushed back in, vast, empty, and brutally cold. He was alive. He was sitting on a high exposed ridge, his leg a useless, frozen counterweight, with two dead men below him and another fled. He was alive. Taji stood on the high ledge for a long moment, the rifle held steady in her grip. She was a statue carved from ice and will, her gaze sweeping the vast, snowy expanse below. She was checking for Finch, for any other movement, for any new threat. There was nothing. The world was empty. The only sounds were the wind and Jack's ragged, painful breathing. She turned and began the climb down to him. It was a careful, deliberate movement. She was not the frantic girl from the alley. She was not the furious survivor from the blizzard. She was a veteran, coming off the line. She reached his side, the rifle held with a casual, deadly competence. She looked at him, and he looked at her. The new, raw respect he felt was so profound it was almost a form of prayer. He had seen her save herself. He had seen her save him. He had seen her do what he, the trained soldier, could not. "Read," she said, her voice flat. She jerked her chin toward the chimney. "Finished." "And Sipes," Jack said, nodding at the body crumpled 20 feet away. "Finished." "Finch ran," she said. "He will not be back," Jack said. "He is wounded. He is alone. He will be lucky to make it to the trees." A new silence settled between them. The battle was over. The war, Reed's war, was won. But the fight for survival was just entering a new, harder phase. "We have to move," she said, stating the obvious. "We cannot stay here. We are targets." "I know," Jack said. He tried to get his leg under him. He pushed, and a white-hot spike of agony drove from his hip to his ankle. He cried out, a low, bitten-off sound, and fell back against the rock. The leg was not just wounded. It was broken, or close to it. The fall down the embankment, the desperate climb, the freezing night. It was done. I cannot," he whispered, the admission tasting like ash. "My leg, it is gone." He expected to see the cold, pragmatic calculation in her eyes, the look that said, "You are a burden. You are dead weight. I must leave you." He braced himself for it. He would not even blame her. He had been nothing but an anchor. Taji looked at his leg. She looked at the useless, swollen mass, the boot soaked in. Jack looked down. It was not just snow. There was blood. He must have torn something, or a rock had pierced him in one of his falls. He had been too cold, too numb, to feel it. She looked at his face, at the gray pallor of exhaustion and pain. She did not turn away. She did not sigh with impatience. She simply nodded, accepting this new, terrible fact. This was the new reality. She slung Reed's rifle over her shoulder. It was too long for her, but she managed it. She still had her knife. "You have the pistol," she said. "I do," he said. 4 shots. "Good." She bent down. She did not offer a hand. She turned her back to him. "Come." He blinked. "What?" "Come," she repeated, her voice sharp. "On my back." He was a 200-pound man, even with his hunger. She was maybe half that. "Tazi, no, that is impossible. You cannot." "I can," she said. "He is heavy," she said, mocking her own words from the dugout camp. "But I am not weak. You will hold the pistol. You will be..." The eyes. Now, we go, or we die here, and I did not do this to die here. She had not killed 3 men to be beaten by 1 broken leg. Shame and awe warred in him. He was a child, he was an invalid, but she was right. It was this or it was death. Slowly, painfully, he dragged himself up, using the rock, and settled his weight onto her small, strong back. He wrapped his arms around her shoulders, his legs dangling uselessly. He held the heavy pistol in his right hand, its barrel pointing at the sky. She grunted as his full weight settled on her. Her knees buckled, just for a second. Jack felt a terrible, crushing wave of self-hatred. "I am sorry," he whispered into her hair. It smelled of pine, and cold, and dried blood. "Be quiet," she panted, "and watch." And she began to walk. It was not a walk. It was a controlled slide, a braced, agonizing descent. She moved down the main slope, the one Jack had fired on, the one that was open to the world. She did not run. She could not. She used the icy rock, the drifts of snow, to slide, to brace, to move, 1 step at a time. Her whole body was a single, tense muscle. Jack, perched on her back, felt every jolt, every slip. He was helpless. He was cargo. But he did as she said. He watched. He was her eyes. His head swiveled, scanning the trees below, scanning the rocks, watching for Finch, watching for anything. They were a single creature. She was the legs. He was the gun. It took them an hour to get down the slope. An hour of her grunting, sweating, and straining, and his silent, agonizing shame. When they reached the bottom, at the edge of the trees where Reed had made his camp, she did not collapse. She gently, carefully, let him slide to the ground, propping him against a pine. She was breathing in huge, ragged gasps. Her face was pale, but her eyes were still burning. The camp was just a smoking fire and a few scattered supplies. Finch, in his panic, had left everything. There was a haversack, a good, thick wool blanket, far better than Milo's, a small bag of coffee, a half-full tin of bullets for the rifle, and a horse, a single horse, tethered to a tree, watching them with a nervous, rolling eyes. "Taji," Jack breathed, "the horse, we can ride." She looked at the horse, then at Jack. She nodded. "1 horse, 2 people." "I can ride," Jack said. "You can ride behind me, or I can be tied on, whatever." She was already shaking her head. She was looking at his leg. She was looking at the horse. She was looking at the high, impassive wall of the mountains. "No," she said. "You ride, I walk. A horse is loud. It leaves a big track. But it is fast. And you are slow." It was the only way. He was the one who could not walk. She spent 10 minutes, her movements efficient, packing the supplies, the ammunition, the coffee, the last of Reed's dried meat. She took his canteen, filling it with snow to melt. She kicked snow onto the fire, extinguishing the last trace of their enemies. Then she led the horse to him. It was a patient, tired-looking gelding. Getting him on its back was a new kind of agony. He had to haul himself up, using his one good leg, his arms, and Tazi's surprising, wiry strength. He finally settled in the saddle, the world swimming in a gray, painful haze. "We go," she said. She did not take the reins. She handed them to him. She would not lead the horse. She would lead him. She turned, not back toward Purgatory Flat, not back toward the settlements. She turned her face to the high, unmapped wilderness, toward the deep, shadowed canyons and the snow-covered peaks. She began to walk. Jack nudged the horse, and it fell into step behind her, its hooves crunching in the snow. The pursuit was over. The running was done. Now, the journey was beginning. They traveled for days. It was a blur of cold, and silence, and pain. Jack's leg became a monstrous, swollen thing, a fire that never went out. He rode, hunched over, his hands frozen to the reins, the pistol tucked into his belt, the rifle, her rifle, in the saddle scabbard. Taji was a machine. She walked. She never seemed to tire. She walked ahead, her eyes reading the landscape, finding paths that Jack would never have seen. She found shallow, frozen creeks where the ice was thick enough to hold them, masking their tracks. She found high, wind-swept ridges where the snow was thin. She was not just escaping. She was going somewhere. At night, she would find them shelter, a deep drift of pines, an overhang of rock. She would build a small, smokeless fire, a skill he had never known. She would take the rifle and vanish for an hour, and return with a rabbit or a grouse. She would skin it with her knife, roast it, and they would share it, just as they had shared the dried meat. She tended to his leg. She did not coo over him. She was not a gentle nurse. She was practical, her touch firm, almost rough. She tore strips from the blanket to rebind the wound, cleaning it with melted snow. She found some kind of moss, which she packed against the bleeding, and it seemed to stop. She was saving his life, again, but it was not a rescue. It was maintenance. She was keeping her partner functional. Jack, for his part, did what he could. He was the sentry. While she hunted, he sat, the pistol in his lap, and he watched. He was the guard. At night, he took the second watch, his back to the fire, staring into the dark, while she slept. She slept like an animal, not in a deep, oblivious stupor, but in a light, coiled readiness. He watched her. He learned from her. He learned to be quiet. He learned to listen to the sound of the wind, to tell the difference between a branch snapping from cold and a branch snapping from something else. The layers of his old self, the soldier, the man of the East, the man of shame, were freezing and falling off him, one by one, like dead skin. He stopped thinking about his past. He stopped thinking about the war. He stopped thinking about Purgatory Flat. His world was this: the horse, the cold, the fire, the taste of roasted meat, and the small, indomitable figure walking ahead of him. He was beginning to understand what she had said to him in the blizzard. You are trapped. He had been. He had been a prisoner of his own memory, his own guilt. He had been trying to buy his way out, to find some grand gesture that would make him clean. But freedom was not about being clean. It was not about forgetting. He looked at his hands, raw and chapped. He looked at his leg, a ruin. He was not clean. He was broken. He was a killer. He had helped her kill. But he was real. He was no longer a ghost. On the 5th day, she led them into a high, hidden valley. It was a bowl, sheltered on all sides by towering, snow-covered peaks, a creek, frozen at the edges but still running black and deep in the center. Cut through it, a thick stand of aspen, their white bark like skeletons, promised firewood. The place felt untouched. It felt safe. Taji stopped. She stood at the edge of the valley, her rifle in her hand, and she just looked. She sniffed the air. Jack sat on the horse, waiting. Here, she said. It was not a question. It was a declaration. They found a deep cleft in the rock, almost a cave, shielded from the wind. It was here they made their first real camp. Not a hurried, fearful stopping place, but a camp. That night the fire was larger. They were not hiding. They were home. Jack sat, his back against the rock, his leg propped up. It was still on fire, but the swelling was down. He was mending. He watched Taji. She was sitting on the other side of the fire, cleaning the rifle. Her movements were precise, economical. She was a picture of perfect, focused competence. He realized he was not running from anything anymore. He was not a soldier. He was not a savior. He was not even a man in the way he had understood it. He was just Jack, and he was alive. He looked at her. This Apache woman, this warrior, this partner. He finally understood. Freedom was not being unwatched. It was not being left alone. It was not escaping a cage. Freedom was this. It was waking up in the morning and choosing to build the fire. It was choosing to hunt. It was choosing to trust the person sitting across from you. It was living a life that was hard and real and true and yours. It was living by what he believed, and what he believed now was not in a flag or a cause or his own honor. He believed in the fire. He believed in the rifle. He believed in the next meal, and he believed with a profound and silent and absolute certainty in the woman sitting across from him. He was, at last, truly free. The snow melted, not with the sudden drama of a flood, but with a slow, grudging reluctance. The high, hidden valley woke up in patches, the brown earth showing through the white like an old healing wound. The creek, which had run black and fast, now swelled, its voice a low, steady roar, a song of release. Spring was coming to the high lonesome, and with it, a new kind of quiet. Jack Davis learned the rhythms of this new life. His leg, tended by Tazi's rough, practical hands, had mended. The bones had knit, but they had knit wrong. He would walk with a heavy, pronounced limp for the rest of his days. The man who had been a soldier, built for marching, was gone forever. At first, the old, bitter shame had risen in him. He was a cripple, a burden, but Tazi would have none of it. One morning, he had tried to follow her on a hunt. He had lasted less than a mile, his bad leg twisting, his clumsy, uneven gait sending stones clattering. He had returned to their cave, defeated, and had sat by the cold ashes, his head in his hands. She had returned hours later, a large grouse in her hand, the rifle slung over her shoulder. She had found him there, a picture of useless misery. She had looked at him, not with pity, but with that familiar, cold impatience. "The fire is dead," she said. I cannot hunt," he had said, his voice thick. "I am just baggage." "Yes," she agreed, and the word was a slap. "You walk like a buffalo. You are loud. You are slow." She had dropped the grouse at his feet. "But a buffalo is warm. A buffalo is strong. The fire is dead. I am cold. You are the man who sits. You make the fire. You make the wall." She had gestured to the mouth of their cave. It was exposed to the wind. He had understood. He was not a hunter, but he was a soldier. He was an engineer. He had hands. While she hunted, he worked. He limped. He hauled. He balanced. He spent a week building a low wall of stones and mud at the mouth of their cave, one that broke the wind and offered a clear field of fire, just in case. He gathered wood, piling it high and dry. He tended the horse, rubbing it down, letting it graze in the new, green patches of grass. He took the rabbits she brought, and with clumsy, painful effort, he learned to skin them. His first attempts were a horror, a mangled mess. She had watched him, her lips pressed tight, not in anger, but in a kind of pained amusement. "The rabbit did not like this," she had said, holding up the ruined pelt. He had felt his face flush. I am trying better," she had said, but there was no heat in it. It was just a fact. So he did. He learned to use the knife. He learned to clean the rifle, her rifle, until its action was smooth as silk. He learned to be the man who made the camp, the man who made the home. She was the one who faced the world. He was the one who made the sanctuary. It was a reversal of everything he had ever been taught, and it was the first time in his life he had ever felt truly useful. Their bond was not one of words. It was one of shared, daily tasks. It was the absolute, unspoken trust that she would return with food, and the equal trust that he would have the fire blazing. A hot, thin coffee brewed from Reed's stolen supplies, waiting for her. It was him, noticing her moccasins, which she had made from the hide of a deer she had killed, were wearing thin, and him spending 3 days clumsily stitching a patch onto the sole. She had looked at his handiwork, his thick, ugly soldier's stitches. She had said nothing, but that night she had rubbed his bad leg, her touch gentler than usual, working the knotted, ruined muscle until the pain eased. They talked, not of the past. The past was a ghost. It was a burned village, a bloody battlefield. There were no good memories there for either of them. They talked of the present. "The creek is high," he would say. "Yes, the fish will come soon. We need salt." "I will find a lick," she would say, and she would. She would return days later with a pouch of grayish, raw salt, and the food would taste, suddenly, like life. He learned her language, a few words at a time, the word for water, the word for fire, the word for home. She learned she began to understand his dry, quiet wit, the humor of a man who has seen the worst and has nothing left to do but make a quiet joke of it. One evening, he was carving a piece of aspen, trying to make a spoon, and the blade slipped, cutting his thumb. He cursed, a low, sharp word. She looked up from the fire. "The wood is angry," she said, her voice perfectly flat, mocking his own clumsy statement about the rabbit. He stared at her, and she smiled. It was not the brief, flickering idea of a smile he had seen before. It was a full, genuine crinkling of her eyes, a flash of white teeth. It was the most beautiful and the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. It was a sunrise. His heart, which he had thought was a dead, cold stone, gave a lurch, and he knew. He was in love with her. It was not the desperate, pleading love of his youth. It was not the needy, grasping love of a lonely man. It was the quiet, profound, and absolute love of an equal. He loved her competence. He loved her strength. He loved her cold, pragmatic anger. He loved her because she had never pitied him. She had never seen him as a savior, or as a cripple. She had seen him as a heavy, loud, broken, but useful thing, a partner, a man. He did not say anything. There were no words for this. The words, "I love you," were a white man's words. They were cheap. They were words from books and songs. They had no meaning here. His meaning was in the wall he had built. His meaning was in the pile of dry wood. His meaning was in the way he kept the pistol clean, the one he wore every second, the one that was for her defense, not his. The valley became their world. The seasons turned, summer came, hot and high. The valley a riot of green grass and wildflowers. Jack's leg grew stronger. He could walk, with a cane he had carved, for miles. He could not hunt, but he could fish. He would sit by the creek for hours, and he would bring back trout, and she would, almost, praise him. She was a different woman. The hunted look was gone. Her face, no longer thin and gaunt, was softer. Her eyes, while still sharp, were no longer flat and cold. They were alive. She would sometimes sing, a low chanting, wordless song as she worked, a sound that seemed to blend with the wind and the creek. They were two people, two histories, a white soldier from Pennsylvania, a veteran of a brutal war, an Apache warrior, a survivor of a genocide. They were the two broken, bitter ends of a country that had tried to tear itself apart. They should have been mortal enemies. But in this high, hidden place, they had found something else. They had found that freedom was not a flag, or a piece of land, or a set of rules. Freedom was a shared burden. It was the absolute, total responsibility for your own life, and the willed, daily choice to share that responsibility with another. Love was not a rescue. It was not a grand gesture. It was not pity. Love was two warriors, agreeing to stand watch together. It was her, trusting him with her back. It was him, trusting her with his life. One evening, as the sun was setting, painting the high peaks a deep, bloody rose, they sat by their fire. They had eaten. The camp was secure. The peace of the valley was absolute. Jack had been working on something for a new... He pulled it from his pocket. It was a bird, carved from a piece of smooth, white aspen. It was clumsy. His hands were not made for such fine work. The wings were uneven. The head was too large. It was a broken bird. He held it out to her. He had no words. She looked at the carving. She looked at his scarred, chapped hands. She looked at his face, at the lines of pain and the new, quiet peace that had settled there. She took the bird. She held it in her palm. She did not say it was good. She did not say it was bad. She leaned across the fire. It was not a sudden movement. It was as slow and as deliberate and as final as the turning of a season. She put her hand, the one not holding the bird, on his cheek. Her palm was rough, calloused, and warm. She leaned in, and she kissed him. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of, fact. It was a treaty. It was a seal. It was the word home, made real. He closed his eyes. The man who had spent his last dollar on an Apache girl, the fool who had thought he was a savior, was gone. And in his place, a man who had finally learned the true meaning of freedom and the true meaning of love, sat by a fire in a hidden valley, and was, at last, found. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love to hear where you are listening from. So please drop a comment below so we can all connect and share our thoughts. And if you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to our channel Wild West Tales. Like the video, and support us further by pressing the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.